your day going?
Great. Thank you for having me. Super excited to be here. It's a great sunny Monday or Monday. Ooh, no, Wednesday.
Wednesday, yes. That's
My, how
okay.
the week flies.
It does.
It's
It
a
does
sunny
fly through
Wednesday
fun.
in Oakland. So excited to be
Awesome.
here. Happy to spend the next hour with folks talking a little bit about Agile and customer success.
Awesome. We're excited too. So I'll hand things over to you and thank you so much. And yeah, have fun, everyone.
Great. Thank you so much, Matilda. So excited to be here. Wanted to talk a little bit about, as I mentioned, sort of the next wave of evolution for customer success. As we all know, customer success isn't easy. Building something that works and keeps on working is really tough. And it almost seems like the second that you figure out something that works, you run into this situation where you take one step forward and two steps back because all of a sudden you've grown and things have changed. It's a real struggle. The effort required to figure out all the little things that reduce the customer's effort and produce the desired results for you is immense. And that's only the start. Then comes keeping pace with your growth and with your customers' needs. As I mentioned, it can feel like that one step forward, two steps back situation a lot. And the thing that I wanted to do today was to give you an idea of how to proceed forward in a manner that is going to help you to control that and to address the challenges that you're going to face. So, as we all know, success is a challenge-rich environment. Every day is a new adventure. There are always things that are challenges for you. You run into day-to-day headaches with real regularity. What we did through talking with hundreds of different folks about the subject and working with a lot of customers is we really distilled them down into 7 core challenges that we felt really kind of captured what folks were experiencing and gave us sort of the impetus for really putting forward this sort of new approach to addressing how you operationalize and build a program. So, chief among those is driving execution. We all know that it's great to have an idea, but an idea without action is powerless. And so often we see situations where you just can't seem to find enough time or enough resources to really get focused on driving execution. The second challenge is doing the right things. We all know that there are a lot of things that need to get done, but which are the right ones? Which are the ones that are going to give you the most impact? They're going to move you forward quicker and get you to the end result that you really want. The third challenge that we identified is the whirlwind and rising above it. I know a lot of you probably run into this every week. You come into the office, you spend 3 or 4 hours working through your email, trying to call the customers that have reached out to you, and then all of a sudden you find yourself, it's 6 o'clock at night, and you really haven't been able to do anything to sort of further the mission of your program, of your company. You haven't been able to solve any of the headaches. You continually utter, if I only had the time or the resources, I wouldn't have to deal with X. And that's a real challenge. The fourth one is sort of that internal siloed communication. So how do you bridge that? How do you build organizational trust? A lot of companies that we work with find that they have a lot of things that they're doing, but nobody knows about it. And so they don't really have a way to reach out sort of from that walled city that they live within and have communication and have collaboration with other functional arms in the company that are going to enable them to be able to better deliver success. And that kind of leads to the fifth one, which is transparency. You can be doing a lot of things to improve the situation, but if nobody knows about them, where does that leave you? And so a lot of organizations struggle with how do we get all the wonderful things that we're doing out and into sort of the broader conversation that's going on in the company. And then, of course, as you're working through all of these, you have to continue to keep the customer there in mind. There's, this real need to not get company centered and to be constantly thinking about how is this going to impact the customer. And that gets difficult, particularly when you're sucked into the whirlwind and you're dealing with the day-to-day headaches and you're making decisions that are related to resolving that pain. And if you're not always kind of looking at that empty seat next to you that represents the customer, you have a challenge. And the last one that really, I think, was super painful for a lot of high growth organizations was simply sustaining the pace. So customer success is an endurance event. It's not a one and done solution. There is really no end point. You are constantly having to evolve and constantly having to change and keep pace with what's going on around you and in your company. There are new releases, there are new challenges, there are new, if you're on AWS, new outages. And so, there's these things that really kind of get in the way of progress. And so you have to figure out this way to sustain your pace and to put it into a container that enables you to really look at it and say, okay, here's what the end state looks like for this effort. And is that going to get us there? And how do we measure out the number of resources and hours and effort that's going to go into this so that we keep pace with things? How do we get in front of it so that we're not constantly reactive? So, there's all these common challenges. Why isn't there a common solution? One of the things that I've found interesting is that folks always are saying customer success is new. And some of us would argue that it's really a new name on things that have been sort of in practice for years. But the reality is that there isn't, for customer success, this one no-fail playbook that you can go to and that you can really say, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z, and it's going to give me 1, 2, 3 results. And know absolutely that it's going to work for you. So what we started to see was people were sort of making it up as they go. And there were a couple of different strategies that we really saw, and they all sort of missed the mark in one way or another. Often we would see sort of this take it as it comes approach where you just sort of are a leaf on the stream and you work the problems as they come to you. You find yourself bailing out the ship rather than making progress. And while it may seem like a solid way forward and be very, very flexible, what it ends up is you're constantly running around and trying to basically deal with these different disparate challenges, and it ends up making you deliver sort of this Frankenstein-like end product, and it also just leaves you exhausted. Another strategy that we saw folks taking was the common whack-a-mole strategy, which is sort of a variation on a theme, but it was just this really like, we found a challenge, let's go and pound it into submission. And again, you miss the bigger picture because you've got this target lock that just doesn't enable you to see beyond whacking that problem that's in front of you. There's a variety of others, and the thing that was a big challenge is just sort of getting folks to recognize that there's a better way, and that there's a way to sort of move out of that see what sticks or analysis paralysis sort of approach that folks are in. And what we wanted to do is sort of explore that today. So what would that new solution look like? What would its core principles be? What would meaningfully move the dial? And so we really distilled it down to 6 core principles that align with Agile and sort of take the 12 principles from Agile and kind of shorten it up to a set that we feel everybody would nod their head at and say, yeah, I want that. So the first one is adaptable. So you have the ability to embrace change instead of fight it. You are able to take what's coming in and look at it in a way that is sort of above the fray, so out of that whirlwind. And you're able to not be dogmatic, so not super like target focused, like we have to do these things. You have this ability to sort of reprioritize what you're working on based on sort of the needs of the customer and the needs of the company. As I alluded to earlier, it's about prioritization. So that new solution would be prioritized. It would enable you to move away from the belief that you can have 10 top priorities. Those of us that have been in situations where that's in play know that it's hubris, that when everything's a priority, nothing really is. And so you set out these 10 top priorities, and you'd be lucky if you get one done. It's this fallacy that you can truly multitask at scale. Three, it would be transparent. So we talked about this earlier, but it would really help to sort of elevate the conversation, break through those silos, and give you something that you could unify the company around. And it would enable you to build trust through visibility and collaboration with the other folks that are in sort of the value chain that ultimately enables you to deliver success for the customer. Four, it would be responsive. So you want something that doesn't have you constantly behind the eight ball. You don't, as I mentioned earlier, want to be dogmatic about this is what we're doing, we're not going to shift priorities. You want something that enables you to be flexible, that enables you to deliver through iteration incremental progress that you can show is moving the needle. Five is really critical from the sort of engagement of your team standpoint. It has to be empowering. So what you want to do is you want to involve your team in the solution so that they really feel like they're a part of it, and that they come to work every day and they're super excited about what they're doing, and they feel like they're making measurable progress towards a great outcome for the company. And six, it has to be experimental. So one of the core things that I think is really great about growth hacking is that it's focused on this concept of disciplined experimentation, and it provides a means to experiment and then through rapid iteration find the not ideal but the good solution that enables you to sort of put that thing that you're working on off to the side and move on to the next thing, knowing that in 6 days or in 6 months, things are going to change, and you're going to need to come back, and you're probably going to need to iterate on what you've already created. So, in summation, we believe that the way forward is Agile. Those 6 things that we identified are at the core of Agile. Now, you're probably thinking that we do some of those, or maybe even all of them. Are we Agile? Well, the reality is you're probably headed in the right direction, but the main thing is you need to find that principle which you can organize around, and a framework that's going to enable you to really take in these core principles and embody them and weave them into your organization so that it's not just a thing you talk about, it's a thing that you do. So how do you get started now that you've seen the 6 core principles with going Agile? Like, what does that mean? Now, I want you to think about it a little bit differently. So like customer success, which can be a mindset, it can be an organization, it can be a department, you have similar paradigms with Agile. So I want you to think about it in 3 ways. One is a mindset. So like customer success, Agile is a way of thinking. It's a way of approaching problems. It's a way of acting that really shifts the way that you look at it. So you don't think of what you're doing in terms of big strategy. You think about it iteratively. How can we solve through incremental progress towards this desired end state that gets us what we need and gets us what our customers need? I also want you to think about it as an organizational principle. So from that standpoint, it's the little o of organization. What I want you to do is think outside the box and think about, how can you structure what you do in a manner that enables you to become transparent, to really be experimental, to be able to look at the work that you have and prioritize it appropriately so that you're not constantly sort of running from one fire to the next. And then I want you to think of it as an operational paradigm. So that's where I want you to consider, how does Agile impact the way you operate your business? So going truly Agile, not only does it give you a better way to execute, but it also can expand your thinking so you can start looking at challenges in different ways. For instance, instead of thinking, hey, I have to hire 8 full-time equivalents, is there a different way? Can you leverage sort of this new concept that's out there thanks to sort of the work that's going on with freelancing around Agile talent? Can you bring in somebody who's not a consultant, but who is embedded in your team is an extension of your team, but they're an expert resource that's going to enable you to take things to the next level? Can you look at the way that you're doing training differently? You don't have to build all of the materials yourself. Is there a different way to approach the challenge of getting your team trained so that they're constantly evolving and developing as professionals? These are just some of the ideas around how I want you to think about it in terms of a shift in your mindset, in the way that you organize and the way that you operate your program. So you have to remember, what you do is what you become. And that's sort of at the core of everything I just discussed. It's really about embodying the change. And so once you begin to look to embody these principles, you may see an entire realm of things open up. You may even start looking at the way that you organize your team and the type of organization that you are. Now, I'm not suggesting that everybody go out and roll out the sort of core principles of a teal organization or adopt holacracy. While these are interesting and they pair well with Agile, they're not required. You don't have to massively change the way that you operate to be able to get started with Agile and customer success. It's simply enough to begin looking at how you can impact your ability to execute, and from there look to see all of the opportunities that begin to pop up, and then capture the ones that are going to give you the most meaningful impact. So it's really about moving ideas into action. So one of the chief challenges that I've seen in working with customers and in conversations that I've been having is this inability to really get to the execution piece. And it's sort of interesting in that, oftentimes you see folks and they believe just because it's on PowerPoint that it's so. And we know that building a beautiful PowerPoint is easy. Building that strategy is only 20% of the equation. The other 80% is all about executing and really moving forward. We know it's easy to put it on paper, but executing on that vision is not so easy. And so what I wanted to kind of talk about was how to get started. I don't want to say that you need to make this massive change in your organization. It's the little things. Start small. My advice is take it a step at a time at a measured pace. So let me tell you sort of a story about one of the customers that I recently worked with where we did this. And so they're an early stage startup, and they are crazy busy. They have a small team, and they engaged with us to basically try and figure out the path forward to move from a reactive support organization and become a customer success organization that was very proactive and that could give their customers, their growing customer base, the type of experience that was going to be a differentiator for them and would enable them to capture more customers. And so it was interesting because, as I was talking with them, they were already an agile organization. And so I went in, shame on me, with certain assumptions. And when we did our first sit down and discovery, it was really interesting because, we talked about the challenges, and, they had all seven of the ones that I listed. They were really in a pinch. They didn't have organizational trust because they weren't able to share what they were doing. They felt like they didn't have this ability to rise above the whirlwind. There was a lot of conversations around like we know we need to do something, but who has the time? I have all of these support tickets that I have to get to. And so it was sort of this support Q0 focus, and they were really struggling to figure out, how do we change things? It's one thing for us to build this strategy around what we want to do, and they had some great ideas there, all the right things, basically invest in onboarding, double down on education, really kind of build out the CSM practice, and have sort of, this for their enterprise customers, this more, high touch environment. And so all the things that you would come to expect when you're discussing, what should our program be. But the thing that they lacked is they couldn't figure out how to give themselves permission to make the time to make the change, and they didn't know how to really organize what they needed to do and get it so that they knew what they needed to do right then, like what was the right thing to do, what were their absolute top priority items, and how could they look at what the team had the capacity to take on. And so, as we went through this discussion, it was really interesting because I'm sitting in this conference room, and I actually even have an agile coach there with me. And he's looking at me and knows my background. So I just have probably now 12, 13 years with agile. And I'm a scrum master and a certified product owner. And he had seen my background, and he's like looking at me and saying like, this is, you can see in his eyes, this is the problem. And so when I basically laid out, you guys are already agile. Who can tell me what that means? How could you leverage that and embody it in what you're trying to do? Can you see the path forward that's right there in front of you? And it was interesting because like the light bulbs went off, and they were like, oh, it was this sort of sheepish look on everyone's face, like, yeah, we're an agile organization. We do all of our development that way. We have coaches embedded in the organization. Why aren't we doing this? We already do daily stand-ups. We just didn't have this starting point. And so when I worked with them, I helped them to understand, like, start small. You guys already have this in your DNA. So this should be a simple progression for you. And while you might not have it in your DNA, the same things that I did with them will work for you. So it's as simple as start to look at creating a backlog of the current challenges and pain points. Now, Agile has, in particular, Scrum has several things that you need to understand that are sort of core to the process. One of those is the backlog. Two is the stories. Three is the daily stand-up. Four is the sprint. And then five is sort of this demoable, and I'm going to do some big air quotes that you can't see here, product at the end of it. And so with that in mind, what I really started to talk with him about is like, how can you start by just encapsulating the things that need to get done into a backlog? And so, it's interesting because they knew a few things, but they couldn't really sort of get over the hump. And so one of the things that I like to do when I'm working with new clients that are sort of stuck here is I went and I grabbed a package of sticky notes and I started ripping them off and throwing them in front of each one of the people that was in the room. It's a team of about 10 folks, and everybody got 10 sticky notes. And I just asked one simple question to sort of get us started. And this is what I mean by start small. I asked them, how are you pissing off your customers? Give me your top 10 things that you know that you do right now that really irritate your customers. And so I gave them all 10 minutes to write them down individually on sticky notes. And then what I asked them to do is go up to the board, the default conference room, if you can visualize it, with the whiteboard. And I had them stick each one of the notes up and present what that was so that we could all sort of understand what their belief was around what was happening that was really irritating the customers. And so we could refine it a little bit. And ultimately, after going around the room, then we starting to look at it from, what do the buckets look like for this? And so we started grouping them into sort of easy to understand groups that everybody could understand just by looking at it, whether they were in support, success, engineering, what have you. It was a common language. And then we looked at which are inside our control and which are outside. And that was the start of creating their backlog. Now, more goes into it. You have to distill them down into user stories so that you can define what needs to get done. But that's not that hard. If you understand what the critical challenge is, writing the story is very easy. And you can choose to use user stories or even job stories. And while I can't go into everything during this talk, I will be posting, and I was up until like 3 a.m. last night, sort of, my blog post got away from me, but I have a really large blog post that's going up around all of these things. So don't feel like you're going to have to reread the slides and then try and distill this all out. It'll be there for you. But so in that, I'll talk about sort of the difference between stories and job stories, so user stories and job stories. But when we got them really sort of breaking things down into what the top challenges were and then sort of peeling back the onion on that, like what is that really, like what goes into that pain point, we started to get the stories. And sort of by the end of this meeting, we had a backlog on the board. And you could see they were all stoked because all of a sudden they went from knowing they had all of these pain points, but feeling powerless to impact them, to, hey, we now have them laid out and they're even prioritized. Like we know exactly this is the number one thing that we should be working on. And then we started sort of talking about like, okay, so what does everybody's time look like? And this kind of goes back to that whole thing about giving yourself permission to work on the things that are going to improve your organization and your results for your customers. It's not all about your day job, but you have to honor the fact that you have to do that day job, right? So we then talked about like how much time could we carve out? What would that look like? And from that conversation, we were able to sort of identify sprint lengths. So best practice is 1 or 2 weeks in length. And we were able to sort of arrive at the destination that 2 weeks would be ideal for them, knowing that they could only set aside a couple of hours every week to work on things. And so what that really did is that informed us of how much time they were going to need, but also what they could peel off from that list. So, back to my earlier point, if you try and boil the ocean, if you try and take down 10 big things and work those in a short period of time, you're guaranteed to fail. And so what we did, what came out of that is, we had this construct in place now, and they had this ability to sort of really visualize how they were going to go about addressing those challenges. And then I asked the next simple question. So we have this backlog of pain points. How many of those are structural? Like how many are going to actually move you from the reactive support organization that you are currently to a proactive customer success organization? What's missing? And so that provoked the follow-on conversation. And by the time that segment was done, we had captured all the main things that they needed to do, and we started to break them down and again prioritize them. And so they were able to really sort of embody what was happening. And granted, they had, already had the training wheels on, so to speak, so they were a little ahead of the curve. But I've done this with numerous customers and seen the same results. And I think you can accomplish the same thing in your organizations just by starting small. Now, one of the things that you need to do is not just start small, but you also need to really think big when you start doing this. You need to really look at not only those pain points, which is a great place to start, but you also need to think about, how are you going to go about improving your results? What are the chief things that are impediments to you reducing churn or increasing your retention rates or getting renewals that are just a foregone conclusion? So, you need to really look at the bigger picture. And then you also need to start thinking about, as I mentioned earlier, this outside the box stuff where, how can you leverage this new way of thinking to solve staffing challenges, to solve budgetary problems? These are impediments, but how can you really start to embrace this agile, this nimble mindset to understand that there is no box? Like it has to be sort of almost asymmetrical guerrilla style approaches to getting things done so that you're constantly able to address challenges and be sort of that truly proactive organization. How can you address the things like improving your professional development for your team? How can you bring in training from different sources and not spend weeks and months with resources you don't have to get that training done? How can you basically look at the program that you currently have and dissect it and really understand like, oh, here are my levers for growth. And if we look at what we want to do, so what's the ultimate company vision? Like, what are we going to need to do to be ready for that? And so you can start sort of looking to the future and knowing that the present is captured in that construct, that framework of Agile, and that you have the ability to sit down and have informed conversations with your leadership around what you're doing and what it's taking and what the end result is going to look like. And you're able to demo to them, as you finish each one of your sprints and you take this iterative approach to solving these big problems in bite-sized chunks, you can show them like, here's the demoable product out of this last iteration that we did, this last sprint. So, with that said, what we really found is that Scrum, Agile, can double the production of anything. It doesn't matter whether it's development, it's finance, it's customer success. It works everywhere. There's a tremendous amount of opportunity to really move the needle and to profoundly impact the industry that we all work in and love by really finding this sort of common path forward, this unifying language, this construct that will enable us to, instead of having conversations about, hey, what did you do to reduce churn? What were the three things that you felt was really magic? You instead can say, like, so here's what we did and how we approached it, and this is what worked and what didn't. It's a different kind of a conversation. I think that if you look at what Agile really brings to the table, you can see why we assert that the future of customer success is Agile. It's not just a way of doing things. It's a way of thinking. It's a way of moving forward. It's a way of elevating sort of the practice. And to help guide that, we put together the Agile Success Manifesto. And I have to give props to not only the originators of the Agile Manifesto, but also to Chad Hornfelt, who back in 2014 actually did a presentation around leveraging Agile in his customer success organization. And he put forward this new version of the Agile Manifesto, which we've leveraged and tweaked slightly. And what it is it really talks about sort of the things that we value and why we value them. So voice of the customer over assumptions. Always have that empty seat at the table that represents your customers. Always be thinking about them. Don't fall into that trap of the easy solution that may have negative impacts on your customers' effort or their outcomes. Be proactive. This has been hit on, I think, probably rather extensively in customer success, but we value proactivity over reactiveness. We want to be in front of the problems, not behind the eight ball. We value iteration over big strategy. It's easy to construct a cathedral and fall in love with that idea. It's much harder to say, we have an idea. Let's create an experiment. Let's prove it. Let's not just go forward dogmatically with what we believe is going to work. Let's prove it's going to work. And that's where we really get into valuing experimentation and data over opinions and conventions. So again, no dogmatic solutions, no, we read it online, it's got to work for us. Don't do what everybody else is doing. Do what works for you. Try things. The best thing that you can do is try something and fail and learn from it. And last but not least, we value internal collaboration over one-way communication. One of the core things that we feel that Agile really enables customer success organizations to do is to have a common language. So you can really build the bridge between the different organizations that you rely on. First and foremost, and probably the easiest one to begin building that bridge with, is product. Agile is sort of at the core of probably an overwhelming number of your development organizations. So by adopting that same language, by speaking to them not about a case or a feature request, but speaking about a user story or a job story with them and capturing it in that manner and giving them the context, all of those things help to really bridge that gap because they understand what you're saying. You're no longer in this situation where, there's a high noise to signal ratio. And that is hugely transformative. The nice thing as well is that by embracing sort of the concept of transparency and really sort of inviting whoever needs to come to your end of sprint demos, you demonstrate that you have a handle on what needs to get done, that you're making progress towards it, and that you understand what other areas of the organization value. So they don't feel like they're throwing things at you and you're ignoring them. Instead, they see you taking that in, digesting it, converting it into an element in your backlog and saying, it's not a priority for us right now, but we will get to it. So it's not that we're ignoring you, it's that we have prioritized what we're doing based on what we're able to do, the resources that we have, and what our core top priority is at the moment. And so, it really gives you this ability to massively transform your organization and kills off a lot of the common headaches that you all face probably on a day-to-day basis. You can then have, as I mentioned earlier, these really informed conversations about what you're doing. And it makes a world of difference because it shows that you have positive control over your destiny and that you're not just a leaf floating down the stream, dealing with things as they come. You're not stuck in sort of analysis paralysis, constantly like looking at the data and trying to determine what does this mean and how does it impact us. You are looking at organizing the challenges that are in front of you and addressing them and getting the work done. Now, with that said, I do want to open it up to questions. So we're going to move into the Q&A phase.
Awesome, Todd. Thank you so much for this. It was a great presentation, definitely very inspiring. So yeah, thanks. And everyone, if you have any questions for Todd, now would be a great time. We have some minutes left. So don't hesitate if there's anything that would apply well to your organization. If you have any specific question, go ahead. I think we already have one question. So while people type in their other questions, so someone is asking, when you were talking about execution, I think, as an individual CSM listening, how do you recommend going about getting executive support for starting this kind of strategy?
Sure. So the easiest way to get started is, again, to really sort of quantify the challenges that you see and feed that back into your leadership, even if it's just starting with your line manager, and say, these are the things that I'm observing, and here's how they're impacting me on a day-to-day basis. And this is what I think we ought to look at changing. I've broken this down into a few things that I'd like to work on, and you can put it to them in that sort of a manner, and you don't have to go into, I was on this webinar and this crazy guy was talking about Agile and I built a backlog and I'm going to put together, a sprint and blah, 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 blah. Have that in your back pocket. Have it in sort of as a mental framework, but lay it out to them as, these are the things, here's when here's how much time it's going to take me. I'd like to work on this. And at the end, I'll show you this. And it's going to take me a couple of different iterations to get through it. And so I'll show you my progress as I proceed. And when you can show them that this is working, and then you can start having conversations around what you're doing and how you're organizing it, it becomes a different conversation. You don't have to convince them to do it. Your leadership should see that, well, wait, can't we apply this more broadly? This is great. You've got a really nice construct. What is this? And that's when you've sort of earned the right to have that conversation around this way that I'm approaching things. And that really does then elevate the conversation. And it shouldn't be a matter of convincing so much as a matter of talking about how can we put a small pilot of this into place. Don't suggest that you have to boil the ocean. Say, hey, I'd like to add a couple of more folks to this, and we'd like to try this. and see where that takes you. I think for me, when I was leading organizations, the thing that I valued most and that I told all of my team is, if you want to move forward in your career, one of the best ways to do it is solve problems. Particularly for me, being selfish, problems that I have. And that's going to really get my attention. And so, I think for an individual contributor, this is a really powerful way to sort of raise the level of awareness around what you're attempting to do and give you that potential, stepping stone to take on, bigger roles, new and interesting challenges.
Awesome. Yeah, that same advice of kind of starting small and iterating, I guess, applies in this area as well. So that's awesome. The next question here is, what are some examples of pain points that they had? So the people that you were talking about in the example at the startup, and how did they deal with them?
Sure. So one of the ones that comes to mind the most was they were they were basically a platform, and folks could sign up with a credit card swipe, and they were sort of off to the races at that point. There was some assets in place to really help them to go from sort of credit card swipe to actually putting traffic through the platform and accomplishing sort of their end business goals. But one of the chief problems that they identified is that it was kind of left up to the customer to be successful. And so they highlighted, like, we need to think about how do we build an onboarding program that addresses sort of these challenges. We know if we spend time with them, if we have the time, that our results are so much better. We've seen it with our large customers where we bring in. So how do we take that process that's sort of being built for the enterprise and step back from it and build out a program that's low touch that enables us to still bring on all of these folks that just want to do a credit card swipe, but give them a path forward that makes them successful. And so out of that, there were some simple things like really codifying through an execution map, like these are the jobs that have to be done in order for them to go from start to actually putting traffic across the platform. Then looking at sort of the educational components that had to be in place in order for a new customer to actually be able to achieve each of the milestones along that journey. And so through doing that, they started looking at, okay, so here's what we have. How does it string together? So one of the first things that they wanted to do was look at the learning path, look at the assets they had versus what they needed, identify the gaps. We also identified that they had to put together this implementation walkthrough guide so that the customer understood all the things that they needed to do, and it wasn't just this internal map, it was right there for the customer so that they could see it. And that enabled them, because their ultimate goal was, as most of our goals are when it's, it's high volume, is to then be able to inform product on what they needed to build into the product to really help guide them through this process so that it was repeatable and that they could do it at scale. Those are a couple of things that came to mind. I could go on, but I think that gives you an idea, I hope. If not, there's an opportunity for a follow-on question.
Awesome. Someone else is actually asking another question about that same example that you gave. And they're asking, do you have any other exercises that you've used to help them identify those main challenges and pain points?
So I do. Some of them are a little more colorfully named. I won't actually say what the names are, but in essence, it's kind of a variation on a theme. The best way that I've found to provoke thought is to look for the pain. So, we talked about how do you piss your customers off. Another great one is, what are the headaches that you have on a day-to-day basis that you wish you had time to address, but you don't? Anytime that you lean towards really sort of personalizing it, so looking at sort of the things that are going to resonate with the audience that you have, um, and unfortunately they're typically negatively biased. So most folks are away motivated when it comes to pain. They don't run towards pain, they run away from it. So if you can, through a simple question, construct this idea that gives them the ability to really sort of put those pain points out in a fashion that you can work with, you've accomplished it. Um, it could be, another way to do it is if you've done your own sort of assessment around what's going on, you can put up the 10 things that you've observed as being the top challenges, and then spark the conversation by going in and dissecting each one. So, there's sort of an outside in and an inside out approach. I hope that helps.
Yeah, awesome. Another question here is what kind of product would CS be making as part of a sprint? Assuming that customer success isn't developers and is a department that supports customers, would that be something like training material, enablement material, or are there other items that CS should be focusing on?
Great question. So, as you recall, when I said product, and I said you can't see it, but I'm throwing huge air quotes around that. So the product, as you alluded to, is any sort of work product that could be, as you alluded to, it could be training materials. It could be, something as simple as looking at your segmentation and determining, what does a, for instance, low touch customer really look like. And so, that could be a bigger item, and you could break that down into smaller stories, and that could be around finding the data on all of your low touch customers, defining what they really are. Like we say, a low touch customer is X number of seats or below. And so each one of those bite-sized chunks that kind of represent progress can be a product. It just depends on sort of the amount of time that you have to dedicate to the sprint. But it could be, something as well if you're in the throes of operationalizing your approach to customer success. It could be building a play for the sales to success handoff. So getting that play into a template. It could even be, if you don't have that, building that template. And so it's just a matter of looking at the things that you need to deliver and having those be your product. The key thing is they have to be demonstratable. So you need to be able to show at the end, here was the user story that I had, and here is the result that I delivered. Here is the product of that. So it's not demoable in the sense like we're going to go and hit the button and something's going to happen. Now it could be that, the logical expansion of that is, say for instance, you already have your playbooks done and you want to start dipping your toe into automation, and you've decided that, hey, we should either try something like Process Street or Asana and create these templates for our plays. So you might be doing the first setup of that inside of Asana and then testing it with your team. And so, it can be a true product. I mean, you could even have it be implementation related stuff in terms of if you are doing other products, if you're, for instance, putting in place a new dashboarding tool, like you just got yourself a huge 55-inch TV in your area and you want to put up like a gecko board. So putting together a dashboard of all the meaningful things, you're actually implementing something, but again, there's a demonstratable product at the end of that. Hope that
Awesome.
makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. We have another question here. Someone is asking, do you have a recommendation for using daily stand-up with Agile customer success?
Sure. So, the key to being successful with daily stand-ups, there's a couple of tenets that are sort of like, please don't violate them. because the stand-ups then just become sort of not stand-ups. And so what those are is 15 minutes in length, no more, and purely focused on status. So the purpose of a daily stand-up is to identify what's happened since the last time we met. Has progress been made? What does that look like? And where progress hasn't been made, it's the job of the team. And we didn't really talk about the Scrum Master role, but the Scrum Master is sort of responsible for herding the cats, if you will. It's their job to say, oh, Bob is not making progress, and I need to look at why that's happening. Is there an impediment? So it's really about progress and identifying problems that are blocking progress. And that's the sole purpose of the stand-up. Anything else should be moved sort of quote unquote offline into a separate conversation. You can dig into it later, but the stand-up is about going around the circle, talking about what you've got done and what your challenges are, and then sort of passing the ball.
Awesome. So someone is asking, do you have any suggestions for systems that can support Agile for customer success? And they're giving the examples of Trello or Jira.
Sure. So, there's a lot of different things that you can do. I personally recommend cutting your teeth using Excel and elbow grease, or Sheets and elbow grease. Um, there are certainly tools out there. Jira is a really solid solution. You certainly can do things like, I know Rally was recently acquired, well, not recently, a few years back. There are certainly systems that will support it. I think the two that you highlighted are really solid. I think Trello, if you're going to go about sort of this maturity progression, my recommendation would be to start with using the Excel and elbow grease approach. Really begin to understand what needs to go into it, and then move to Trello and leverage Trello to do it. It's super simple to use. The user experience is like awesome, and pretty much I think almost every organization has Trello somewhere in it. And then when you find the expiration date for Trello, and what I mean by that is when you've kind of pushed it as far as it can go, and you're dealing with a huge backlog and things are going off the page, you can't get a screen big enough, then you should start looking at something like Jira. The inside out for that is, if you already have a development organization that's using something like Jira, you can start there. But I would say there is value in really leveraging the spreadsheet-based approach just to cut your teeth, because you may find that the way they've set up Jira doesn't work for what you're attempting to do. While Agile is fairly, and Scrum is fairly consistent, whether it be in marketing or in development or in sales or in success, there are differences, and that could mean that you might have to do some tweaking, and that could slow you down if you have to convince, obviously, like system admins to change common templates, etc.
Awesome. Thanks for that answer. It is 2:01 p.m. Eastern Time, so I think we should maybe wrap up. If we didn't get to answer your question, sorry about that, but feel free to follow up with Todd and Success Hacker, and I'm sure they'd love to help you. Todd,
Absolutely.
thank you so much. Do you want to say a couple of things about Success Hacker before we wrap up?
Sure. So I guess the one thing that I want to highlight is the conversation about this is going to continue. And I think that a great place to continue that conversation is in our community. It's super easy to find. It's called Outcomes, and it's the customersuccess.community is the address. Definitely, if you're not a member, we'd love to have you. It's free for all, and it's very much focused on helping folks like yourself solve your challenges, find your way forward, being able to collaborate with peers so that you don't feel like this is a solo journey, that you're alone. Um, Definitely check it out. And as I mentioned, the conversation will continue there. So if you have additional questions, um, I'm always on there, and I'm more than happy to dig into, wherever your line of questioning may lead. So thank you so much for spending the last hour with me. I really enjoyed it, and I hope you got value out of it.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much, Todd. Great presentation. I learned a lot, and I'm sure everyone else did. And yeah, I would definitely recommend everyone to go on the Success Hacker community. I'm a part of it, and there's a lot of value there. And right before we go, a couple of things about Amity. So Amity is a customer success management software, and we help CSMs grow, retain their customers through different apps. For instance, you can see here the report apps, customer health scoring, and such things. But if you want to learn more about it, just send me an email. I'm sure everyone has my email address. That's the one on all of your invitations. And otherwise, you can go on getamity.com/demo, or just the website, and click request a demo, and we would love to show you around. But yeah, that's it for me. Todd, thank you so much for that. It was amazing. I'm excited to put together the recording and send it to everyone. I'm sure everyone's looking forward to being able to share the replay with their teams.
Fantastic, and thanks again, everyone, for the time. Definitely check out the community and check out successhacker.co. We offer a full range of offerings to help sort of free you from your operational burdens. Obviously, Agile is the core of what we do, and we'd love to help you. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Awesome. Have a great day, everyone. Todd, have a great day, and thanks again, everyone, for being with us today.